Pratt said he had a strike. It's 3-0.
You see a little frustration. There's been a lot of quarter pitches that call it and thought he should get it. He had got video. The break ball just a wee bit outside. What did you talk to yourself?
Out another full count.
Go fastball to get the first strike. 3-1 fastball to get the second strike. Did you call it that deck?
Rosanna with a fastball. It's 3-2.
3 fastballs in a row. And now a quick word from TD Ameritrade.
Stop trading.
All right, guys. Looks like we got some people logged in here. Probably the same old, same old. Well, let's do this. Nobody said hello, so sure some people will now. Anybody? Anybody? Well, Mina's here, so we'll start. And probably some other people. All right, cool. All right, guys. Good evening. Happy 8 o'clock. One more day of this. We'll get you guys going. All right, so territorial expansion, page 230. Once again, let's go ahead and take a look at the Google Live document. I'm gonna call it YouTube Live because it doesn't make sense what we're doing. Retitle it, excuse me. So period 5. You know, actually look at period 4 compared to period 5, right? What we went through last night. So actually it's a little bit less information. You know, again, the goal of this is like, these are, in my important, like, you know, APR, we call them the things that you have to know, right? These are some of the things that you really have to know. So first of all, let's go ahead and start on 230. We're not starting on 230. Let's go back to this period 5 document, which I'm actually highlighting right now. Sorry, the YouTube Live review, and go down to period 5. So things that we need to cover, make sure we understand the Mexican-American War, right? The one that starts ultimately with the independence of Texas, and then continues further as Texas is put in the United States, and then the United States as a whole will go further into Mexico, but starts as a Texan revolt and Texas independence. Remember, they're called the Lone Star State. They have their independence for 5, 6, 7 years, something like that, before they're incorporating the Union. The reason why they didn't incorporate the Union is because of the Missouri Compromise. We're trying to find another state above. So basically, Texas and the annexation of Texas was put on the back burner during the revolt. And then when the Mexican-American War comes in, we have to create a new compromise, right? The Compromise of 1850 of all these new states. We get our abolitionist movements. First of all, we get the Fugitive Slave Act, which is something that really frustrates the abolitionists, because now slavery is enforced all across the United States, despite, you know, lines of like 3630 parallels and all of these sectional issues. A slave, if found all the way up north in New York, could theoretically be brought back down the south. And even more, you know, it's really forcing the participation of Northerners and perhaps abolitionists to capture the slave when they probably feel it's morally correct to help the slave get free. And, you know, at this time we have the Underground Railroad, you know, and remember that the Underground Railroad is not just a base camp for, you know, African slaves. Most of the people that are providing warmth, food, shelter, and these little stations as they move north are white abolitionists, or WASP abolitionists. So we get the court case Dred Scott versus Sanford, which reinforces the Fugitive Slave Act that Dred Scott was a piece of property and slaves are therefore a piece of property. And although you might move as far north as almost border Canada, that slave is still considered property as long as it's within the United States. Notice that there's nothing about the Civil War. We're just talking about the effects, and then we have to really talk about the Reconstruction area, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. How African Americans, despite getting these amendments, ultimately are not getting their full rights and privileges, and also minorities as well, right? But specifically, the focus on the free African Americans that have just come out of the Civil War, and slavery has officially been ended. But what's going to how even though slavery's ended, the political and economic superiority against African Americans continues, right? We're going to see these in things called like poll taxes. We're going to see these in the Jim Crow laws. We're going to see this in sharecropping, as nearly everything has to go back to the person who owns the land, and the person who owns land most likely is a white elitist, right, from the South, or at least somebody that has a lot of land back then. Remember, a lot of Southerners at this time were actually poor farmers, right? A lot of the white were actually poor farmers, right? There's these large plantations, and similar today, how we have a few rich individuals and a lot poor. So I'm not gonna say a few, more than a few, but there's definitely a striking gap between the rich and the poor in our country currently today too. White supremacy in the KKK, again reinforced by the African American sharecropping, and the idea of Reconstruction during this time is that a lot of these slave states, these former slave states, or the former states in the Confederacy, really were forced to take on things, and really saw the Civil War as a occupation force and as something that they needed to counter rather than work with. You're not going to change ideas on people, especially if you lose a war, right? So the Southerners, just because the Civil War ended and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment got passed, does not necessarily mean that everything is peachy keen down in the South. So that's a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at. So let's go ahead and get into the dirty business of it all. Thank you for the 3 thumbs up, whoever did that. Appreciate that. So to page 230, Texas, right? So remember that at first, Mexico encouraged Americans to immigrate to Texas, right? Mexico, the capital cities in Mexico DF, the former capital city of the Aztecs, which they called Tenochtitlan. And so that's, Texas is really far away, right? I mean, at this time, it's where Oregon and Washington is, right? Really far away from Washington, D.C. And so what do you need to do? You need to have people colonize it. Well, Mexicans at this time were not willing to go up all the way through there. And in that area is that huge desert, right? There's a massive desert in the middle of Mexico. So again, coming back to this word geography and geographic, I want to say figures, but features, geographic features like a desert kind of keeps people from moving. This is true in Africa, right? That's why North Africans are look and act a lot differently than, let's say, our equatorial or Southern Africans, right? North Africans tend to be a little bit more, they have usually a Muslim faith, right? Libya is up there. Algeria is up there. Morocco is up there. And then if you think of sub-Saharan, we tend to think of some Christian and animism, all right? And definitely, obviously, different geographic figures. So not to go on too much a tangent, because I know you guys hate when I do that, but I'm just trying to explain that the reason why Texas is so barren is, first of all, it's super close to a kind of a United States that's seemingly more hostile and growing. Secondly, and that's also another reason why they probably encourage colonists. And secondly, geographically, it's cut off from Mexico. You have to cross a massive desert to get up there. So what happens is Mexico at this time is encouraging these Americans to come over. However, as Americans come over, they need to be Mexican citizens. And what does it mean to be Mexican citizen? You need to speak the Spanish. You need to become Roman Catholic. And eventually you need to give up your slaves. And all of these are going to be massive issues for these Texan ranchers and these Texan cotton producers and all of these farmers coming over, right? They're Protestant. They speak English. They are not I mean, a lot of people say Americans were quite educated at this time, but I don't know if they're willing to bend over and be bilingual like we cherish that idea today. Remember, we're talking about the 1830s here. And so, especially when they outlaw slavery, right, there's immediately going to be some kind of response by the Americans that are living in Texas. And so the response is a revolt. They basically go down and they capture Santa Ana, and they basically force them to sign a treaty, and that treaty recognizes the independence of Texas. And again, we don't really need to get into the dirty details about what happened during the war. All we need to know is what caused the war, which is that a lot of Texan American immigrants are going to Texas, and when Mexico City, underneath the leadership of Santa Ana, basically becomes more dictatorial and starts taking away some of these supposed rights, like Protestantism, like English, and like owning your slaves. When those things are taken right, they revolt, and ultimately they win their independence. When again, why are they pushed away at this time? Is because we have yet to kind of organize ourselves in the northern states. Sorry, I have to watch the Giants. They just hit a home run against the Dodgers, so that's awesome. All right, sorry about that. A little moment. I know you guys listen to music and get distracted doing your homework too. So anyway, so that's kind of what happens over here for the annexation getting denied. So that's a moment. They're going to be there for about 5 or 6 years, and then ultimately in the Compromise of 1850, they're going to come back in. So I don't really care about the boundary disputes in Maine and Oregon, so whatever. But ultimately, let's go to the annexation so we can complete the story about Texas. Really, so I think they allow Oregon in, right? Is it Oregon? Yeah, obviously. So Oregon comes in. Let's see here. Let me double check this. Let me read. Sorry, give me a second. Yeah, it's interesting. Like at this time, it doesn't really say. It says annexing Texas, but in that paragraph, I don't know if you saw it. It pretty much says that they were trying to get they got a treaty with Britain, and then some Northerners viewed as sell out the Southern interest because it removed British Columbia as a source of a potential free state. But at that time, war comes out, and bam. So I guess when Texas gets into it, it's kind of already off tilted because they didn't really add anybody. Remember, this is where I kind of got confused, and I apologize for that. But it doesn't look like Oregon gets annexed, right? There's just suddenly there's a war with Mexico, and we basically force this ratification to get Oregon, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Oregon's a state yet. But they're not even going to probably deal with this until they deal with the Mexican-American War and win the war, right? All of America's going to go together on a common enemy. All right. So let's talk about the war with Mexico. So again, Texas at this time, it gets annexed, but there's not really a balance yet because we go immediately into war. All right. So war with Mexico. Two things, so number one, number two. Number one is that we want to complete our manifest destiny, and California is part of that equation, so we want to grab it. And number two, we want to settle the Mexico-Texas border that they're a little confused about, right? Some people want north of the Rio Grande, some people want south. Ultimately, we're just going to get the Rio Grande, so we're going to use that. What are the causes of it is ultimately we actually provoke a fight, right? We cross the side and say, no, we didn't know that this was the Mexican side, but basically pick a fight with a patrolling Mexican, a Mexican patrol, excuse me. And when they come back over and retaliate for our fights, they're going to kill a few soldiers, and now we're going to say American blood has been spilt on American soil, so let's go to war. All right. So the war goes down. I think, remember, California becomes its own state for about like 50 or 60 days or something like that. But we get the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and so let's go and take a look at that. So Mexico recognizes the Rio Grande, which is a river, obviously, if you speak Spanish, the large river, as the southern border of Texas. So if you want to look at the map on page 235, you can see the Rio Grande River there clearly labeled. And the United States took possession of all those territories, and you can see all those territories. Now, I noticed that these gray ones that are shaded that we know as the part of the United States do come a little bit later, but they're pretty much around the same time. All right. One other thing is they try to create this law. This guy creates a law that says there's going to outlaw slavery to anything, slavery to the new territories, excuse me. So like there can't be any more slavery in New Mexico, or what will be Arizona, California, what will be Utah, Nevada. If you're looking at the map on page 235, all those areas are going to be slave free. It gets passed in the House, but again, in the Senate, it gets defeated twice. What is this showing? It is showing that people are already beginning to, right after the war, immediately trying to figure out how to deal with this slave-free state issue. So that immediately has hit it. All right. So Austin Manifesto, I don't know if we care about that right now. Walker Expedition, don't care. Gadsden Pershing is just a part of Arizona. You really want to do it so that you can get a railroad in. Don't really care about that. This part is just society, page 237. So what's going on in the West? Guess what? We have fur traders. They're mining and they're farming and they're ranching, right? I mean, I don't think we need to say more than that. Railroads are coming up strong. We know they're going to really take off during the Civil War and even more so after the Civil War. And that's where railroads get a lot of power. Panic of 1857. Let's see what happened. Prices drop. Probably cotton prices. Probably supply went up. Unemployment in northern cities increased. Just overall prices must have dropped, and that caused again a little bit of the price is dropping. Supply must be high. You don't need to hire as many workers, and then you have unemployment. Right? It's not really clear about what the heck is going on there. Let's look at the 5 things at top. Foreign commerce. Yeah, I don't really care about that either. There's that one moment. I mean, I never talked about this, but there you go. Sent Commodore Perry and a small fleet of naval ships to Japan, which have been closed to foreigners, and we get open door with Japan. So it's number 5 on page 239. But again, I wouldn't freak out about this. It's that the only thing I really want to focus you guys on is, kind of the revolt of Texas and how that kind of leads into the Mexican-American War and how the Mexican-American War is leading to the Civil War. So we were kind of quickly done. So quick, 17 minutes, but we were quickly done with kind of chapter 12, which is, the focus on the Mexican-American War and the revolt of Texas and the annexation of Texas and how that's leading up to the Civil War. So we'll take a look at your guys' questions. Yeah, so Hendrine's question, Mexicans want Americans. Yeah, they actually encourage immigration there. Again, if we know the word frontier, which is the edge of civilization, Texas was way past the frontier of Mexico. And they had all of this area they had got from Spain when Spain had come back in 1492, right, with Christopher Columbus and all his conquistador friends. And we already talked about Jeb, talked about the California mission. So Spain owned all that area. And then when Mexico gets independence from Napoleon, in the early 1800s, they get all that area. But unfortunately, Spain and Mexico have done nothing, right? Spain has been focused on European problems, and then Spain gets taken over by Napoleon, and Napoleon's been focused on European problems, right? So there's been no investment in forts. There's been no investment in trading. There's no development in its economics. They haven't encouraged people to go explore that northern area, what would be California, or not. Well, California has a mission system and it goes all the way to California, but we have evidence that people went to Oregon and Washington. Obviously, we know that Lewis and Clark went to Oregon under Thomas Jefferson much earlier. But all this area had been really unexplored by the Spanish and later the Mexicans, theoretically. Right? There are evidence of some explorers going up there trying to find these massive gold mines that they keep on here of. Obviously, we'll find them in 1849. They don't never successfully get it. There's all these legends that there's this massive gold mines up north. And so you got these miners and explorers kind of hanging out, but really you don't have any really Mexican colonial outposts out inside of Texas or Arizona or New Mexico or Utah or Nevada, or all the way up to Idaho and Oregon and Washington, and California has its forts, right? But they're used. They're fledglingly being supported. And when I say fledglingly, not a lot. So what do the Mexican government says? Well, we need people to develop this area. We need people when they're there. When they're there, they pay taxes. That's going to make our thing. We need people to come in there and declare that they're Mexican citizens to defend us from a growing American presence, right? They probably felt that the Americans are starting to move west and can see this as they keep on grabbing more and more of this land that's theoretically unexplored, except for, the millions of Native Americans that previously lived there and did live there during these times. So they encouraged them for economic development, right? I keep on telling you guys the importance, and again, this is not good for our environment, but it's good for the economy. And I hope you're understanding those kind of not balances, but how they're two kind of really against each other. But you want more and more people pay more and more taxes. More and more taxes allow you to build bigger armies and bigger navies and do other things. Mina, so the cause of the war was that the Americans didn't want to convert their religion and learn their language. I'm going to say it's slavery. Yes, because these two rules come out about you need to speak Spanish and you need to convert to Roman Catholic, and the Americans come in, they go, we need to do what? They're like, yeah, you need to convert. They're like, yeah, we're not going to convert. We're not going to be Catholic and we're going to speak English. And the Mexican government goes, oh, all right, no big deal. And there's no fights. But once you take away their slaves, everybody started tripping out. So I would say, Mina, there are kind of like three important factors, also led by a couple of people. Remember the Alamo. Right? There's this thing that these Mexicans are savages and they're just killing these Texan citizens, right? And how dare a government under Santa Anna be so cruel and ruthless to a bunch of Mexican citizens who you have American ancestry, let's say, right? So there's this kind of mixed thing, but they were encouraged to come. And when they were encouraged to come, and the government, a lot of people also say that General Santa Anna acted more like a king and a dictator. And so maybe this is a revolt due to politics. But one of their political rights that is being taken away is slaves and slavery. And that's, if you read the book, it says that's one of the big ignition points. So, I wouldn't stress nearly as much religion and Spanish, but more of a focus on political, the effects that Mexico City was trying to put political control on it, and especially on the issue of slavery. Andreen, I think I clarified your question. Nami, for the homework, do you got to copy down the notes, or do we only create 10 questions? Hussein, you do both. What was the free soil movement? We're not there yet. So we'll get to that in a second. Oops. Why do Mexicans want strangers invading their homes? Remember, coming to the land, it's not really their land. They're trying to build it. So I think, Andreen, if you're listening, I think I kind of answered that question. Yeah, money, remember, in the form of taxes, right? You got people. And also, you also could, if they're Mexican citizens and America invades, theoretically, they should defend Mexico as a Mexican citizen, right? So that's kind of another idea that's going on there. Wow, Giants 3-2. We're winning big time. Hendrine, I think, gets it. So main customer is mostly money, or is religion a part of it? I'm going to say it again, slavery. I'm going to keep on saying one more time that General Santa Anna, who is actually the president, and he's a general. It's true of our country, but usually we equate generals and presidents as dictators, and he kind of takes away the state rights of owning slaves from Texas. This sounds very familiar, doesn't it? We'll fight a civil war because of this, because Abraham Lincoln will take the state's rights away from owning slaves, theoretically, right? And actually, he never did. He was trying to make agreements the last second just to self-seceded, saying that he's going to do it, even though he never did it. And kind of like what we call preemptively striked, right? They did things before things even happened. But in this case, the president government actually did take away the slaves. All right. So I think we answered that. Let's go to the next one. We're 23 minutes into this. Union in peril. All right, now we're at the free soil movement. So free soil movement, what are you trying to do? You're trying to ensure that it is free soil. So we got the 15, but now we've got 15 free states and 15 slave states. If you see on page 247, those two numbers pop out. However, actually, let's go back a little bit more. Let's look at our four things. What was the cause? The Union in peril. What was the cause of the Civil War? If you look at the time, 1848 to 1861 is the beginning of the Civil War. All right, it'll end in 1865. So, sorry, I was looking at the game again. So it's 4 issues. Number 1, slavery. All right, it's a moral issue in the North. It's a religious issue in the North. However, it's defense, it's a way of life, and it's the economic well-being of the South. Constitutional disputes. Does the federal government have more power, or do states have more power? Multiple times we have seen Federalists and even Democratic Republicans, like we looked at last time with Henry Clay's proposals, acting more Federalist and ensuring that the federal power is supreme over state power. And that is very true today. Right, this legalization of marijuana, according to federal law, is a class 1 drug. It's up there like heroin and everything else. And at any time, the DEA and the president who controls the DEA can tell the DEA go in and start busting everybody. That law that California passed is totally illegal according to us, and we know that that federal law rooms supreme. When we have a government, a president who gets elected as a kind of an abolitionist, and everybody starts freaking out in the South, right? They're concerned that the federal government's going to have too much power. Number 3, economic differences, right? The industrial North, tariffs and the role of tariffs and what they're actually putting the taxes on compared to the agricultural South. And we've seen that develop since the very beginning of our history with the Mayflower and the Protestants up in the North and a lot of single men down in the South that were focused on the raising of tobacco, then later a little bit sugarcane, like you keep on saying, and then more importantly, cotton, right? And you had the word King Cotton in the last time. Number 4, political blunders and extremism, right? We got John Brown, we go to Kansas and Nebraska, we actually have people killing each other over the issue of slavery. So you can argue that the first actual shots of the Civil War didn't happen actually during the formal Civil War, but it happened more with Kansas and Nebraska, right? And we'll get there in a second if you need any questions. So they all say this is unnecessary war, right? So this what we're talking about now leads up to the election. And once the election happens, everybody trips out and goes, oh God, Lincoln's in control. He's going to take away all of our rights. And the South of me goes, we're seceding. And Lincoln's like, dude, I haven't said one thing. I haven't passed one law. I mean, I got the Emancipation Proclamation in my back pocket, but it's kicking it there and I'm not signing it. I told you guys when I got elected president, the first thing I got to do is just keep this place together. And that's all I'm focused on. Like, can you at least give me a chance so we can talk, we can compromise, and maybe we can figure out how we can time this thing out, what else we can do. Maybe we can give him half wages or something. I'm sure he was doing his best to avoid a war, but immediately, without even thought, they do that. So these are some of the massive causes towards the Civil War. And remember, we don't really need to know about the battles of the Civil War, how the Civil War went down, right? We know about the effects later, Lincoln's love of business to win the war, but really we don't need to know who it was and all the individual actors and individual battles that a lot of people love to know. But unfortunately, it's just not important, which is good for us. Right? It makes things a little bit easier because we need to remember only a certain number of facts, and last thing we need is all these wars. All right, moving on. Free soil movement. So what is that? Obviously, these individuals are going to states and ensuring that they be free. All right. What is popular sovereignty? Here's that word sovereignty that shows up more time. Word popular sovereignty always means vote. So hey, you know what we want to do is we want to allow people to vote. All right. Well, let's create a state, and if that state wants slaves, so be it. They want slaves. If that state wants to be free, so be it. Be free. I don't care if they're touching Canada, and I don't care if they're touching Mexico. Let's do what the people decide inside of that state. Let's go back to the states and let them vote and figure it out. All right. Don't care about the election of 1848. Compromise 1850. Super important. Let's go ahead and check this out. And make California the Union as a free state. All right. Which, again, I think balances out on the Texas issue, but earlier it said 1515. So I'm really still confused about all that. Maybe one of you guys could tell me what the heck happened there. When does Texas come in? What's the balance of free versus slave? When does California come in? And what's the balance there? And when the hell does Oregon come in? Because we took it from the British just now in a treaty, but we're not doing anything with it. Anyways, let's just get to the points. So admit California Union as a free state, divide the remainder into 2 territories, Utah and New Mexico, and let's give them popular sovereignty, aka the right to vote. So let's figure that out. We're not going to figure this out. Let the people figure it out. And remember, usually the people figure it out by 49 to 51%. So 49% of people are pissed and 51% are happy, right? Democracy is always a very sticky, frustrating issue. All right. Give the land in dispute between Texas and the New Mexico territory. In return, federal government is during the Texas public debt, $10 million. So Texas, you don't get everything, and I know you're in debt. Hey, didn't this sound familiar a couple days ago? Remember Hamilton? Hamilton's like, here, what we'll do is we'll create a national bank. And what the national bank? I know you don't want it, but now we'll get all your debt. Now you're debt free. You know, we got some kids in ASB, and we understand the importance of being debt free, right? Gives you a little bit of freedom what you want to do. Ban slave trade in District of Columbia. However, they can still hold slaves, but not the slave trade. And remember, Abraham Lincoln is going to see a slave auction, close. And remember that slave auctions actually can't happen around the corner of Washington, D.C. So this is right in the heart of our capital, and people are seeing this. And then, most importantly, in the Compromise of 1850, if there's two things you remember is this. People get the right to vote if they're being slave or free, no matter where they are in the United States. I don't care how north or how south you are. People are going to have the right to vote. And then secondly, the Fugitive Slave Law, forcing anybody who sees a runaway slave to immediately support the people that are the bounty hunters, let's say, that are trying to catch them. All right. Or that's actually what they're called. So bounty hunters, right? So that's what that's what happened. You can see some of the massive issues are going to lead up to it. 249, agitation of slavery. You don't see key terms. So moving on. Fugitive Slave Law. There you go. Underground Railroad. What is that? Remember those steps. Now the Fugitive Slave Law is making it totally illegal to be part of the Underground Railroad, even if you're in the North, right? So you're supporting these individuals leaving. Uncle Tom's Cabin. I don't think we need to go into that, but how that was such a vicious. It really struck at people's hearts. I'm not going to say the word vicious, but it is a very emotional book that sold a lot of copies, as we know, and how that kind of set the stage for even more violent abolitionists, right? Moving on. So here's that Kansas and Nebraska Act. So what happens is the Kansas-Nebraska Act, let's see. Basically, I think they divided Kansas and Nebraska, right? And they go ahead and figure out, according to the Compromise of 1850, what to do. And what happens in the Compromise of 1850? What happens in Kansas through the Kansas-Nebraska Act? We get Bleeding Kansas, and where we actually have people going to each other's camps, one being a slave camp, one being a free soil camp, and going over there and killing people in the middle of the night, right? I think John Brown is accused of killing a family in the middle of the night, who was another one. And that was due to a reaction of basically a slave camp firing cannonballs literally into Lawrence, Kansas, where Kansas University lives today. So there's that. New parties. We get the Know Nothing Party. The Democrats are going to be the Southerners. They're going to be the Confederates. They're going to be the slave owners. So remember, we have the Democratic Republicans. They've shortened the name to the Democrats under Andrew Jackson. Those same Democrats are going to be what we call the Southerners or the Confederate States of the United States during the Civil War. We get the birth of the Republican Party, and we know who the father of the modern Republican Party is, Abraham Lincoln. So now we have two parties, Republicans and Democrats. The Republicans are up in the north largely. The Democrats are in the south. We have a couple of Democrats and Republicans sprinkled over. There's a few Whigs still stuck in New York and Connecticut doing their thing. But we got the Republican Party, who's going to be the one that we consider the Northerners, the Yankees, the Union soldiers are going to fight the Confederates and the Democrats down the South during the Civil War. Dred Scott versus Sanford, again, super easy. Don't really need to know this, but there's 3 bullet points. Guess what? Dred Scott can't sue a federal court because he's not a citizen. He's property. He's a piece of luggage. A piece of luggage can't sue a person in court. Congress does not have the power to deny anybody property without due process of law. And basically, by creating the Compromise of 1850, which set that kind of borderline, the Missouri Compromise. Yes, the Missouri Compromise that set that line. That was totally illegal. There we go. So the Missouri Compromise is unconstitutional because it excluded slavery from Wisconsin and other northern territories, and you couldn't do that according to that. So there you go. Page 257, John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry. I'm skipping the Lincoln Douglas debates. Doesn't matter. We know who wins. John Brown. The one thing about the debates is like Lincoln comes out as this guy that can really speak and really can hold a crowd. He's a great orator, right? Great man with words. And we're understanding the power of great man with words, from Adolf Hitler to Abraham Lincoln to Martin Luther King. These people are going to be thrusted to, and even FDR, right? A day in which we'll live in infamy, right? He does his fireside chats, right? So all of those items. But John Brown's raid, so just Lincoln wins because of multiple reasons, but who cares? He wins. John Brown raid on Harper's Ferry. Remember, this really pisses off the Southerners. John Harper is a white abolitionist. John Brown. John Brown is the same guy who was accused of murdering a family in the middle of the night over in Bleeding, Kansas. This same guy goes all the way over to Virginia and basically tries to raid a national depot full of arms and basically kill all the soldiers that are there. And his idea is to take all of those, start marching through Virginia and creating massive slave revolts and slave armies to free even more slaves. And so that was his intention. He's executed for his treason. Obviously, you can't kill American soldiers, and we are not at war at this time. And so, what really happens is people get really, really frustrated. People getting fired up on both sides. The slave owners are like, this is this Northern conspiracy. They're not going to listen to any of the laws. They're even going back to Virginia, where the slave trade thrived and flourished, the home of Thomas Jefferson, and they're trying to cause problems there. The Northerners can't believe that a man would be executed for fighting for such religious and moral beliefs as ending slavery. So both sides are getting fired up, all right? And so when the election gets results, we have a secession, and we now have a civil war. All right. So main cause of this war would be most of mine. What does it mean when it says the union, or like people are coming together like unionizing? Yeah. So hindering, when we talk about a union, most of the time we're talking about a labor union. All right, and that you guys know I have labor unions with teachers. What I'm saying here is the North, what we call the United States. There's right in the two sides. There's the United States in the North and the Confederate States in the South. The United States, they always called themselves the Union. They were Union soldiers. They were there to protect the Union. They were to keep the United States together. When we say union, I mean just a union it could be a marriage. It's a relationship, right? You can put two things in unison, right, together, right? So what we say by union, every time I use the word union at this time, I'm talking about the North, and people are trying to end slavery. When you say people get the right to vote, do slaves count that? Absolutely not. They don't even count as a full person, and they're not a citizen. That's what Dred Scott said that. When I say people get the right to vote, are we talking about women in these areas? Absolutely not. We're talking about the men that say that we're part of the 60,000 that became that are citizens of this state, and that where it's a state, now we get to vote. Remember, there are rules about becoming a state according to the Northwest Ordinance, and one is that you get 60,000 people, you can apply for statehood. So I don't know what the number is that now. I mean, back then it might have went up because we got more population happening. But the idea is you hit a certain number, and that number can play statehood. When they play statehood, they will have another vote, and those men inside that state that claim residency in that state and say this is my home are going to be the ones to vote on the issue of slavery. And we can see why people were running to in Nebraska and Kansas to ensure one was either free or one was slave, or both went free or both went slave. Mina, would Lincoln be considered a progressive because of what he did with the Civil War? Yeah, that the word doesn't exist though, right? You're gonna have to have the word populist in the 1890s for farmers before you even get to the progressives of the 1900s, and these are educated book authors and social workers like Jane Addams. I go to Jane Addams to be more of a progressive than Abraham Lincoln. Many historians would say Abraham Lincoln simply was a man that was a political mastermind. Remember, he is a lawyer, right? So the idea is that his focus was manipulating everybody and everything to keep the country together. So I don't know if any historian would label him as a progressive. I mean, the fact that he definitely was against slavery, he definitely had strong religious and moral views, but that doesn't mean that people who weren't progressive didn't have strong religious morals views. And remember that slavery in many cases was being justified by the use of the Bible. And the Bible adds slavery. And so many religious scholars down the South are saying this slavery thing's okay. Jesus and the Jews and the Egyptians and pharaohs and all the way back through the history of time has always had slaves, and the Middle Easterners, they are the massive slave trade, especially there in Africa. So what are you guys talking about? This is totally a perfectly acceptable social thing that we're doing. America is no different than the rest of the world. So I don't know if any historian would ever call it progressive, and I think you would be difficult to do it. If you're going to call anybody progressive, say Teddy Roosevelt. With his trust and with his ABC, not his ABC soup, because that was his brother or his cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But I would say with his breakup of trust, his pro-union stance, his conservation of nature, But, even during his time, and, Woodrow Wilson's considered a progressive. However, and you can see why he wanted to make the world safe for democracy. However, he kept the army segregated. The KKK is revived underneath his watch. This famous movie that you can see on YouTube, it's a very, very famous movie called The Birth of a Nation, actually happens underneath his tenure. And that's basically the KKK's like all-time movie. It's what they watch to hail and understand what their country is. Right. So, yeah, I would never say that he's a progressive. And even the progressives that we have today is hard to call progressive Democrat today, which I like to call myself a progressive. But where are some of the roots and ideas? Well, we can see Woodrow Wilson making the world safe for democracy, saying we shouldn't colonize people, how we should have League of Nations where we should talk to each other based off of how we're voting. But he has yet to give, women the right to vote. That would be considered very progressive. So, people are detailed in their times. Right? And when I grew up in high school, the feeling, unfortunately, to our lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, QI something, it keeps on going, community was not the best, right? A lot of words were used in my community to put those groups of people down. So I think we always try to judge history back with our own moral compass, and it's difficult to do so when you're not in that setting. I'm sure our children will look at some of the things that we do, with Instagram and maybe the treatment of women, and go, what the heck was wrong with you guys? So don't know. Can you go back to the Dred Scott versus Sanford? Yeah, just tell me what exactly you need to know. Those are 3 bullets. If you want to look at page 256. We don't really need to know about it. Just as a heads up, Dred Scott was a slave. His owner dies. He's inherited, I believe, by his wife, by obviously the widow now, the woman whose husband died. The woman takes a trip or is going to go live up in really far north. I want to say as far north as Wisconsin, but I don't even know if that was the case. And when he goes there, Dred Scott goes, "Whoa, I'm way north. I'm almost touching Canada. I'm free, right?" And he takes his thing to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court goes, "What are you talking about? You're not even a citizen. Property. I have the right to be here. Get out of my court." And yada yada. So there's the 3 bullets. So if you want to give me a more specific question, Mina, I'd be happy, and you can figure that out. I'll go back to it for you. What was the act that allowed more white men and landowners to vote? Yeah, I don't know. It's probably an amendment that takes out the property qualification. We talked about under the age of Jackson in our last one, universal male suffrage. But remember that most of the states had done this. And what do we mean by universal male suffrage? Again, universal, all male men, suffrage, the right to vote. All men get the right to vote. So there it is. No property issues. Women? No. Slaves? Hell no. American Indians who are not citizens? Absolutely not. Immigrants that have come here and have been only here for less than 14 years and are not citizens don't get the right to vote either. So you can see it's primarily all white men, but up in the north, we probably have some free slaves. I wonder if, and then, like I said, I don't know if they're considered citizens. So I don't know if they have the right to vote. Great question. Haven't seen asked, but those are like really small details that I don't think that the test will really pick your brain apart with. So there you go, Hillary. All right. I don't see any more follow-up questions, so I'm going to continue on. So next we get the Civil War. I'm not going to go through much of this. It's really about the causes. We just hit the causes right when Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln have this massive debate. Frederick Douglass. No. Who the hell is the guy? Not Frederick Douglass. No, he says Douglas here. I'm not the Lincoln Douglas of it. Stephen Douglas. Sorry. So Stephen Douglas, once that debate happens, and basically there's election, and Lincoln wins. Remember, Lincoln probably won just based off the population issue, right? The population in the North was so much higher than the South that just based off electoral votes, he probably won. So he probably had like 4 Californias in his pocket, right? Up there. So when he wins, immediately the South goes, so this guy's an abolitionist president. He's going to take it. We're going to hit first, and we're going to declare secession. And so all that happens. I am not going to go through all these things. The only thing that I really care about during all of this stuff and the fight is this. how much the North had compared to the South. So let's go ahead and find that. So page 270, wartime advantages, right? You guys did that Khan Academy, and the Khan Academy was clear that militarily the South was more of like, this is our home, we need to protect it from just invaders, and all we have to do is just like basically keep this war going on forever, and eventually the Northerners will get sick and tired of war, they'll go bankrupt, all their young men will be dying in foreign lands down in like Virginia and Mississippi that they don't need to be a part of, and their parents and their families are going to get pissed at this guy called Abraham Lincoln who's forcing all the young boys to fight. So look at, we have 22 million versus 5.5 million. We had 800,000 immigrants in the North. They got 180,000 African Americans in the Union Army. So first of all, just by population size, we're much bigger. Militarily, I'd say South has an advantage. They know the territory. They can hide. They can pick and choose when they want to fight, whereas the Northerners have to just march in, and when they see people, begin fighting. So again, from a military standpoint, from a like, I was going to say Fortnite, as you guys say, Fortnite, they can be on the defensive. They can keep on building those walls that you guys all freaking create in that game, and basically shoot and create their fort and get ready to go. Whereas the North are the guys that are running in the middle of the map, just hauling butt, trying to go kill people, right? I mean, who's ultimately going to win? Who has a better idea of the map and also has more defensive elements about it? So, they military had that, but the manpower size was much bigger. Economically, huge, right? They had all of the freaking factories, all the railroads, and 65% of the farmland, right? Confederates are going to start trying to talk to the Europeans to try to get help, like, the British or the French again. Why not the British, since there's this long-sided hatred towards the British down in the South. And then politically, right? The Confederates were struggling to create their independence like we were in the Articles of Confederation, but the Union was, there's that word Union. The Union was trying to preserve the Union. All right, moving on. I'm skipping all this stuff. I think we've gone into a great deal about the Emancipation Proclamation. Cotton diplomacy was the idea that, hopefully Britain could come support the Confederates, but the British go, we got Egypt, we got India, and they're making better cotton at a cheaper price than you crazy Americans, so good luck, may God be with you. We will get to some of these things. 13th Amendment, notice it's passed during the war and slavery. All right, then we get the 14th, which will declare them as citizens, the 15th, which will give them the right to vote. End of the war, don't care, draft, whatever. Financing the war, notice that we borrowed $2.6 billion, and how we do that, government bonds. So if my parents were alive, they would have been the people that gave money to the government, knowing that the government's going to pay them back plus interest, right? So they're going into debt. Greenbacks are created at this time because they need to print money. So you create these things called greenbacks, which we still use today, right? The color it's green. Notice that it's interesting. This paper could not be redeemed in gold to stop the inflation, right? They basically said it's worth this amount of gold, but there's no trading around to stop the gold supply from going up or going down, and just keeping the gold supply standard. So that kind of controls the inflation. So again, controlling gold, controlling currencies. So just interesting on that. Also, the modernization, the use of railroads and factories are going to be really, huge in our next period as big business begins to have more and more of a corruptive influence on politics in the U.S. government. Don't care about the tariffs acts. Always social change important. Women go to work, right? Women are fighting the Civil War, as nurses and stuff. End of slavery. Cool. There it is. So again, gonna fly through that because in my opinion it's not too important, but I'll take a look at your questions before we get to Reconstruction on page 291. When is the 2/3 Act enacted? The 3/5 Compromise, Hillary? I don't know what you're talking about by 2/3. I think she's talking about the 3/5 Compromise, and that was created at the very beginning of our Constitution, where they're trying to figure out for the House of Representatives if we're going to do it by population, where they can count slaves. And obviously, the Northern are saying 0, and the Southern are saying 1, but they don't get the right to vote. And the Northerners going to go, well, if they don't have the right to vote, how are they going to be considered a citizen? And they go, okay, we'll call it 3/5. So they get 3/5 of a vote, and 3/5 of a person. So for every 2 slaves, you get 1 1/5, right? For every 5 slaves, you get, I don't know if I'm doing my math correctly. That's 15, 25. I don't know. You get 3 people. I'm moving it. Yeah. So every 5 slaves, you get 3 votes. 3 people, right? 3/5 of a vote. Hello. That's easy math. All right. Sorry, I'm getting tired. Hillary, 3/5. Yeah. So 50th compromise. There it is. Wait, during the Civil War, did some slaves become free when fighting for a certain side? Yeah, the Emancipation Proclamation, right? That was definitely it. And obviously, during this time, people are telling them if you abandon and you go to the Union, you'll be considered a citizen. And remember that we have the Fighting 55th from Massachusetts. A great movie. It takes 4 hours to watch. It's one of my favorite of all time. It's called Gloria. And it's all about, so with Matthew Broderick, and he's a guy with a huge military lineage, right? His probably grandfather was in like the American Revolution type of stuff and War of 1812 crap. And he actually leads an all-black regiment, and they're actually paid. Now they're not actually in the movie. They're not paid the same amount at first. I think they eventually get paid the same amount. They aren't paid as much, and they actually burn their paychecks as an act of saying, "Screw you, we don't even collect the pay. You're paying us such crappy wages." But they fought alongside. Now, I think you're alluding to the Emancipation Proclamation, which clearly said that all slaves are free now, not only in the North, but also actually it didn't even free the slaves in the North. They were freed, but the border states who joined the Union, their slaves were actually still in slavery. It's all the states that rebelled, they were considered free, and a lot of them were encouraged, obviously, to take up arms against their slave owners, right, and basically fight for the Union. And when we say the Union, the North. All right, cool. Answered Hillary's question. Mina, we're good. So more importantly, the effects of the Civil War, Reconstruction. So here we go. All right. Page 291, Freedmen's Bureau, important group of people that were trying to help out free blacks get resettled, find jobs, start to get educated, understand their rights. Johnson and Reconstruction. I don't think I'd trip out too much. The black codes, I would definitely look at page 294. So black codes, these are, even though the slaves are free, these codes are limiting their political and economic independence. They prohibit blacks from renting land or borrowing money to rent land, to buy land. Freedmen into a form of basically signing these sharecropping contracts that limit at most. And also you couldn't testify against whites in court, right? So, it's not like they're getting their full freedom. 14th Amendment, page 295. This is an issue with our immigration right now that some people are freaking out about, that if you're born here in the United States, even if your parents are not citizens, you become a citizen. So that's the 14th. And they said all citizens get equal protection of law. We know, remember I told you that during this amendment is going to be ignored during war for the Japanese as they're interned and put into internment camps. I don't know if we need to figure out the other ones on the 14th. It says right here, it talks about the other clauses into it, but I'm not going to freak out about that. Reconstruction Act of 1767, basically, notice if you were to read that, they had to pass the 14th. They basically divide the South into 5 districts, and the military goes in and controls all those districts. So again, if you're in Mississippi and you're going to a predominantly white school, sometimes this war is called a war of occupation rather than a civil war. The Northerners came in, they killed a lot of people, they destroyed a lot of homes, they burned down a lot of cropland, they let their economic way of life called slaves be freed, which caused even more social problems that maybe that we're still dealing today. In addition to that, they just stood here until they made you pass a law that you didn't necessarily agree with. So, a lot of people some people interpret the Reconstruction Acts as kind of harsh, right? That you got the military just kicking it. A bunch of young boys are away from their families and away from the North, just hanging out in the South and pissed off that they're even there and missing Christmas and missing Thanksgiving and missing other things. You can definitely understand how maybe some of these Southerners were really frustrated of the military being stuck in their areas. So we get that. Impeachment of Johnson, don't really care. 15th Amendment, 15 to get the right to vote and not race, color, but it does have to do with sex. We're not going to get the 19th, which will give women the right to vote. Scalawags and carpetbaggers. These are people who are coming down. Scalawags, these scalawags were people who supported Lincoln that were in the South, and then all these Northerners start moving down. They bring their carpets and their bags down to their new homes in the South. They're called carpetbaggers, right? And it's just, again, frustration that the South is basically losing its way of life and is being invaded by all these foreigners that are American foreigners, whether these Northerners or these traders from the South. All right. And there's sharecropping on page 300, right? We know that sharecropping is that basically, I don't have any supplies since I just became a free slave, but I want to get some land. Here's some land and here's some tools. However, half to everything that you make is going to come to me in the form of some kind of tax or rent payment. And that basically kept, African Americans still in this lower class for a long time. Page 300, we're getting the beginning of period 6, right? The corruption in business and government. This is where we get that Boss Tweed, right? $200 million, right? I think, remember that one thing cost like $2 million to fix plaster that cost about $800,000 to do in the first place, but he did it wrong. And because he did it wrong, he was rewarded with another $1.2 million. So all that stuff happening, the whiskey ring, right? People not paying taxes and evading taxes just because they're businesses or just because Grant's brother-in-law or something like that. So a lot of corruption happening. White supremacy and KKK, pretty simple and easy. Page 3 and 2, we just puts it in one paragraph. Amnesty Act of 1872 basically allows ex-Confederates, except for the top, basically to be treated as citizens back here in the United States. Compromise of 1877. What the hell is that? So Compromise 1877, get the heck out of, all the military out of the South. And secondly, we're to help you Southerners start moving your goods and get your economy going so that you don't feel like you're being picked on by us Northerners. We're going to create a transcontinental railroad. Cool. And that is the end of period 5. Shoots. All right. Hillary, during the war, where were the Northerners getting their cotton from? Great question. The South? From the warehouses that they had it in? Maybe from the border states that signed back onto the U.S., onto the Union, that are producing it? Google. It's an interesting question. Where did Northerners get their cotton during the Civil War? Cotton in the Civil War. I don't know if I wanted to figure out from stuff from Mississippi. Trading with the enemy. Sorry. I went to the New York Times one instead. So it says here, according to what I'm reading, that the Treasury Department would issue licenses to trade cotton with the North, and the North actually consistently was trading cotton, and there were individual people who were grabbing cotton and probably putting it onto railroads and taking it north and making money off of it. So it sounds like this trade, although Lincoln didn't want it, Lincoln's only one man. He can't control a government that has millions of people underneath you, right? Donald Trump can't be responsible for all the FBI agents and all of the troops that how they deal with around the world. And so you get some of these rogue individuals basically doing their own thing. The article I just read said multiple times people pursue their self-interest, even though that may have been against the viewpoint of the President Lincoln at the time. So there you go, Hillary. It looks like that cotton thrived, but it's probably definitely under the radar more, so to speak. Yeah, I mean, you're starting to think like a historian, Hillary. Financially, the North needs this for textiles, right? They have textile mills up there. They're trying to make clothes, right? What do you need clothes for? You need cotton. So, but then again, at this time, I just give you a heads up, we have a strong Navy, and when I say we, the Union does, and the Union kind of tries to strangle the South, especially at the end, by blockading all of its ports. So, if you can imagine that cotton is being produced still, if you're not fighting the war. However, you're not being able to trade it with Britain most specifically and other European countries. So I guarantee people are making some deals. I guarantee there are multiple times that the Union troops would take out like a whole town. And they go, oh, wow, there's a warehouse full of cotton. Perfect. And that's ours. And it goes up. Right. And we'll pay some of these army members the money of finding the cotton. Right. And they'll eventually go to the textile mill, and the textile mill will get it at a much cheaper rate. So I'm sure between warfare and between illegal smuggling, during war, all these things type of happen, right? Black markets tend to go up, right? Things go underneath the radar a little bit more because the government's kind of losing it. And, we see that corruption in big business. Why? Because the government's so focused on fighting the war that it's not looking at the nitty gritty of these all small deals that are happening, looking at the big picture of just trying to win a war. All right. No more questions about the war and Reconstruction and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. It is 1 hour and 1 minute. The Giants are still winning. That's awesome. Good for me. Where's Hector? All right. If you guys have any more questions, let me know. If not, I'm going to say adieu. Rest up. Try to get through 8.1 and 8.2 tomorrow. Maybe some DBQs. No questions. Thank you, Mina, for starting the thank you NAMI chain. So I know that you guys are all good to go. All right, guys. Yeah, no worries, Hillary. Good questions. Both of you guys. Hendrine, thank you for asking questions as well. Ooh, Nor, hopefully you guys, it's all made sense. Cool. All right, guys, no problem. You guys have a good one, and we will see you tomorrow. Have a good evening. Peace out.